So while I light the chalice, would you look at your order of service and join me in the words? We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together. Well, early in most services that I lead here and as a guest minister, somehow I usually feel compelled to sort of set a context about why it's me, presuming to have something to say that some of you might find meaningful, and about why I chose the theme that I did for the day. On that first point of why me, your worship committee had a cancellation for today and contacted me as one of your occasional guest ministers to see if I'd be available instead, despite the fact that I have said to them that although I absolutely love leading services here, just not in the summer. Would I reconsider? Well, clearly I did. Well, so there are two reasons that I hesitate about committing to summer dates. The first has to do simply with the calendar. Summer's when I'm always involved in a leadership role every year at the IRIS conference on Star Island, the Institute on Religion in an Age of Science, and one way or another, that's a pretty consuming experience. And every year, the summer is when I usually make one of my two annual, about 2-week trips to the state of Maine, to the Bangor area where I grew up. That's when the family and friends I see, most importantly, my brother, my one sibling, and his wife are most likely to be available. And this past year, my usual winter trip didn't happen due to a family health vulnerability that mandated no visitors. But the second reason I hesitate about a summer date here at UUMH is that your music director, Frank, does not play that role here in the summer. He also happens to be my spouse and someone with whom I find it very meaningful and helpful to plan and sort of integrate right at home all parts of the music service. And so far, at least, there isn't someone else playing that consistent role in music here during the summer from week to week. Not only that, but Frank already had other commitments for this morning, so I didn't even have the option of twisting his arm, so to speak, which I would have done otherwise very readily. Now, in that context of no Frank, I want to offer special appreciation to Jude for offering his musical expression and talent to enrich our morning gathering, and I'm grateful to the music committee for arranging Jude's presence and supplementing his music, and to Jude's teacher, Barbara, and to Jordan for the gathering music and for the duet, and to Frank for at least having created the video to cover the accompanying the opening hymn, which you will see in a moment, and to Joe for making sure that all the tech aspects of all of this work, and to Jordan. But as you will see later in the service, all of that detailed multi-email planning left one musical part of the service not covered. And that was the question of who would accompany the second and closing song. Well, we all know there are some great a cappella performing groups out there, but I'm not a great fan of a cappella congregational singing. I had my heart set on using that particular song that we have at the end, and no one, and I know there are a lot of piano players out there even today, no one replied to my multiple messages of, Can anyone accompany this song? Frank has arranged a very simple piano accompaniment. Please? No reply. In the end, I sort of twisted my own arm, and before I knew it, watched myself from a distance in horror compose an email which read, "I will accompany the song if there are at least a few choir members to lead the singing and sing a little bit louder than usual to kind of cover over my accompaniment." Now, it's true that I play the piano, sort of, and the violin. But there's a story intertwined with that aspect of my life, events which became framed as a story only in very recent summer weeks. And that leads me to the second thing I feel compelled to do in these opening words, that of setting a context for why the particular theme I chose. Well, I figured that since I don't usually lead services in the summer, I could do something today that I don't usually do. In this case, before the end of our time together, in addition to hoping that I offer something, I am inviting you to share with me by email later, as if or whenever you choose, any of your meaningful stories. However you interpret what I try to suggest today constitutes a meaningful story from your life, those which I call credo stories. The listing toward the end of the order of service, congregational response, is not something we will do in real time here this morning. It's simply a written invitation to respond as or if you wish in writing with your own stories. Confidentially, with such sharing would prevail, of course, and I would make an effort to reply in some way without too much delay. In several of my previous sermons and services here at UUMH, I've touched upon today's theme of our stories and from a variety of angles. And for today, I wrote it up for the weekly newsletter this way, which you may have read. I wrote, in June, this past June, my friend, J.D. Stillwater, led a wonderful multimedia service here, inviting us into the spiritual experience of the science of oneness that is the universe in which we live, and which also is the universe becoming as each of us. He emphasized that there is one unifying big story. But I ask, how do we absorb this reality and actually apply it in our everyday lives for purposes of personal sustenance and being of use in the world? One practice that's meaningful to me might be noticing, naming, and sharing those smaller stories of spiritual experience in which that big unifying oneness that science tells us about is also very particularly revealed as the unique chapter of you. You as a gift that actually helps create the ever-increasing oneness of it all. In this coming half hour or so, open, if you will, to whatever stories from your own life arise in you. And since this is a summer service, you'll hear a smaller story or two of my own particular experience of such oneness, in the spirit, though, of those essays that many of us might remember having to write in September when we returned to school as kids for a new year, namely, what I did on my summer vacation. Our affirmation together. But first, love is the spirit of this meeting house, and service is its foundation. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth and love, and to help one another. Please be seated. You may know Rumi was a 13th century Sufi mystic and poet. In the poem, this poem that's in your order of service, he's acknowledging, I feel, that spiritual awakening to the divine, to the ultimate nature of reality, to qualities like the oneness that science reveals, as J.D. Stillwater spoke about last month, often can be overwhelming, difficult to absorb and apply to our everyday lives. Rumi mentions a few exceptions to this, like the ancient legends of salamanders being able to escape fire and of Abraham's deliverance from the furnace of Nimrod. But what most of us need, he suggests, to meet the holy are embodied everyday experiences, including stories of those experiences. In your order of service, space portrays this as a paragraph, but let us read it now and savor it in unison in the spirit of poetry. A story is like water that you heat for your bath. It takes messages between the fire and your skin. It lets them meet, and it cleans you. Very few can sit down in the middle of the fire itself, like a salamander or Abraham. We need intermediaries. A feeling of fullness comes, but usually it takes some bread to bring it. Beauty surrounds us, but usually we need to be walking in a garden to know it. The body itself is a screen to shield and partially reveal the light that's blazing inside your presence. Water, stories, the body, all the things we do are mediums that hide and show what's hidden. Study them and enjoy this being washed with a secret we sometimes know and then not. It matters that we wrestle with what we believe, what we hold dear about the ultimate nature of reality. A particular sense of calling I feel in this regard is to lift up the practice of noticing and framing as smaller stories those events of our lives that exemplify our encounters with what we might call the big story, the ultimate story of how things are and which things matter. I'm with Rumi in feeling that we need things like stories to meet the light, the divine spark that blazes inside each of us, between us, and among us. We receive stories from various traditions, such as biblical and indigenous peoples' stories, but we each also have our own personal scriptures to claim. I have called these credo stories. Although in English the word credo is often associated with its 16th century use to refer to a kind of creed, like the first words, I believe, of things like the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, its original Proto-Indo-European roots mean, quite literally, credo, to put one's heart. For me, a credo story is about an experience that tells you how things are ultimately at the level of the heart, of feeling, of intuition, even before you engage in the task, the study of understanding why. So today, let me relate a few Credo stories from my recent summer vacation so far, looking at them through a particular lens of reflection. I'm using the word vacation loosely here. As I do this, I invite you to consider whether any of your own Credo stories, even a particular title of one, come to mind. That little section at the order of service for any who are interested is simply a few websites related to things I'm likely to mention today, and the one book listed there under references and resources by Matthew Fox is one that I have referenced a lot in services in the past year. So last month, as Dawn mentioned, last April, I began a 9-month online program at the Center for Process Studies, a certificate program in process thought and practice. It is focused on the philosophy and theology and the application of the same of Alfred North Whitehead, who came to prominence about 100 years ago when he came from England to teach at Harvard. I've now completed one course and will start the second one this Wednesday. Whitehead and the tradition of process thought he revived felt that personal experience is the starting point for all wrestling with the meaning of life, and that nothing in our experience, including what we might call the paranormal, could or should be excluded from such wrestling and exploration. From Whitehead, a quote indicating one thing that we might discover in our own Credo stories. This quote from Whitehead: "Reality is not static, it is a process of becoming. The fluent character of the togetherness of things was already emphasized in Greek philosophy and in the ancient traditions of China and India. All things flow," said Heraclitus. Indeed, this fact is too obvious to escape notice. But unfortunately, Whitehead wrote, things which are too obvious often escape receiving their due emphasis. It's the end of the quote. Well, wouldn't some of us like to convince the leaders of our current political administration to notice a bit more the fluidity and the togetherness of so-called things may be better recognized as events? Another quote from Andrew Davis, the teacher of this second course I'll start Wednesday. Quote, "Whitehead's philosophy of organism is one of the most significant attempts in all of philosophy to think through what reality must be like because you are part of it." I love that you're not outside doing philosophy, creating your understanding of the meaning of life. You have to do it by imagining that you yourself are not separate from reality, but an exemplification of it. Well, all of us in this program have to do either a research paper, an art project, or a project in a local community as a culminating assignment for the certificate program. So I approached my summer vacation with that December deadline in mind, having submitted a first draft proposal to do something in some community around my work with Credo stories. And by community, I've had conversations with folks in IRIS, the Science and Religion Group. I've thought about UUMH, and I've also considered my network of family and friends, some of whom I knew that I'd be visiting on this recent summer trip that I just made. So to begin planning, I recalled that I have long wanted to clarify something about my own musical piano history as a kid in Bangor, Maine, and by the time I was finalizing my plans, I had already sent that email saying that I would accompany the closing song today, which somehow prompted me finally to act on this curiosity. To fill in this history, I contacted the archivist at the Bangor Public Library and gave her some specific questions, since they housed the old records of the long-closed Northern Conservatory of Music, where I had taken piano lessons for a while. I needed to check if I was remembering correctly why and when I stopped taking piano lessons. I planned on visiting the archives while I was in Bangor and was dismayed to find that the library would be closed on the only day that I could go. However, what I got from Greta, the archivist, after a few days of work on her part, were electronic files filled with news articles and photos related to my and my classmates' musical activities on both violin and piano from elementary school through high school, including many with references and photos of classmates and friends I'd be seeing on this trip that I just finished. It was amazing, the work that she did. You see, when I was 7, I started taking piano lessons from a family friend we called Aunt Gwen. She lived in a walk-up, run-down apartment in Bangor, Maine, and her living room was magical to me. She wore flowing, flowery dresses, set her hair in those big clamps that make big waves, and she burned incense. I don't know if you do that, Barbara, but she burned incense at every lesson. And we worked by the light of a big Tiffany lamp. She gave huge hugs. I adored her, and I adored playing the piano. We had in our home a lovely spinet piano in the parlor of our house at the seminary where my father became president. I sailed through all the John Thompson books and loved to practice. My kid brother Mark also, I don't know if Mark is on Zoom today or not. Hopefully not. My kid brother Mark also took lessons and was deemed to have more native talent than I did, but he hated to practice and rarely did. His career ended at about age 9 when he got so mad about having to practice that he bent down and literally took a bite out of the wooden part of that piano. I am not kidding, Jude. I mean, he left teeth marks on the wood on this beautiful piano. I, on the other hand, couldn't figure out why my father always told me to stop practicing because it annoyed him. Many years later, when he was in his 60s, he took lessons, but he quit in about 8 months. I always wondered as an adult if he was envious of my childhood love of practicing. But Aunt Gwen was primarily a violinist, and so when I was 9, she started me on violin, and by the time I was about 10, she had me transfer for piano lessons to the Northern Conservatory of Music at Bangor Symphony Hall with a more accomplished teacher whom I called Miss Hayes. Very formal lessons. No Tiffany lamp, no incense, no hugs. I know now that her name was actually Miss Hayes Hayford, but perhaps that was too long for me to remember at the time. So I had my first recital with Miss Hayes at age 11, playing Beethoven's Für Elise. And I messed up, big time. I had to play from memory, and I got stuck on those little repetitive passages, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, emitting a very loud tsk in embarrassment. Shortly after, Miss Hayes was performing in concert, and I was eager to go to get a sense of how I could emulate her and make up for my failure. But her concert was on a school night, and my father refused to let me go. That encounter with him became a nightmare for me in a way that meant that I stopped then taking lessons and stopped playing the piano until many, many years later. But over the decades, when I was older, I made sure, one way or another, that I always had a piano, a few hoisted by crane into a second-floor apartment through the window. And I went on to learn several not-so-easy pieces totally on my own, for the love of it. Bach, Beethoven, Chopin. I play, often daily, but for myself, and often intentionally when no one else is around. My favorite is Beethoven's Sonata Pathétique, which I have been practicing for decades now. Second favorite, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat. Until today, if I make it, I have played in public exactly once. That time I was 11 and messed up on Für Elise. Do I thank the music committee for not having a music director for the summer? You see, otherwise, we might not be blessed by Jude's presence and music and the inspiration to me and to others of a young person shining forth in the fullness of who he is and what he loves. But also, if at the end I actually walk to that piano and accompany your song without passing out, it will be the first time in 71 years that I have played in public for anyone but myself. And I will give a thank you to Miss Hayes Hayford and to your music committee for not having a music director in the summer. You can do slide 1. Is that Miss Hayes? She's the one seated with the white hair. To me, this story that spans 71 years is a credo story. Process thought, whether you consider it philosophy or theology, affirms the primacy of our experience, including our feelings. And I experience this long-term connection of events as some kind of blessing of closure, a checking off something on my bucket list, even in the context of loss, even if I mess up this rather simple song, because you all might be listening. As you who know me might guess, I call that activity God. God as loving presence who is each of us, companions us, is between and among and beyond us, always luring us into creating new life through the power of love. Do you have such a story in your story bag? One that might span years or decades before you even quite recognized it as a credo story. Well, I told you one of my so-called vacation stories related to the archival search and determining why and when I quit piano lessons, but I printed out and took those files, articles, and photos with me as I headed off to Damariscotta, Maine, to spend 2 days with my childhood friend Janice, who now goes by Jan. Jan's husband of 37 years, her third, Tony, died this past January after a long illness. Jan became a prolific watercolor artist in midlife and maintains in her beautiful home a gallery filled with her work where she sells originals and prints and cards and teaches regularly, and a studio where she paints. She has gardens and keeps a large number of mid-coast shops stocked with her cards and prints, and until recently she took a group every summer for a week on Monhegan Island to paint as their teacher, Jan Kilburn. She has a great website. I was set on this trip to explore the possibility of sharing credo stories with my friends and family as possible fodder for my project, my assignment in Process Thought, and I was not disappointed. She was an eager conversationalist, commenting on how few people venture such conversations about what might be called their spirituality. Jan and I had started out in elementary school both playing violin, and I had an archival photo with me from a 6th grade concert. That's slide 2, Jordan. Is it up there? I'm not adept at creating these slides. I don't know if you can see it, but I was a year younger than many of my classmates, and I can't see this right now, but I'm the geeky 10-year-old in the white blouse and glasses, and she's the more sophisticated one to my left with the bangs, if you can see it at all. She played violin through high school, but was discouraged by her broken family background from going to college, went to hairdressing school, and later discovered her passion for art by working in a home store and organizing displays. I asked her if she had any memory of noticing her love of painting as a child, and she said once in 7th grade. She was in a class where they read a poem by Robert Frost about snow and were supposed to create an illustration for it. She remembered using some kind of white medium, sort of freestyle, to create the falling snow, and that she won an award for her work that earned her a year of art lessons. And then nothing until decades later, and her being recognized in the home store for her artistic tendencies. Slide 3 is the Frost poem that she remembered, which she illustrated, her first attempt at art. The way a crow shook down on me the dust of snow from a hemlock tree has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I had rued. Maybe you have a story of a childhood experience that only later came into focus as a particular hint of your later calling in life. At some point, I asked Jan what motivated her most in her approach to her work. She paused and said, "What I really hope is that people experience a sense of warmth and home from my paintings, and I'm often drawn to using pinks and greens to do that." Slide 4 is one of Jan's paintings. How many of us might have stories where the experience of loss early on, in this case, a child's broken home, later in life can be claimed as a source of creating new life for oneself and in the world. Paintings that give a sense of warmth and home. The painting that on that slide includes the Sheepscott Community Church, the spiritual home where she and Tony were very active for years and where his memorial service was recently held. She readily grasped my focus on credo stories and the general question of, can you identify any particular stories of spiritual experiences that have had an impact on your life? There were several, but 2 stand out. One was before she became an artist. She had married young to someone who was unkind and unfaithful, and had 2 boys whom she raised largely alone. Her second husband was loving, but an alcoholic, and with him she had another son. Becoming regularly involved in Al-Anon eventually gave her the spiritual grounding she needed to make a break. Every day when her baby boy took his nap, she read the One Day at a Time, ODAT, materials of Al-Anon. On this particular day, she sat down for her daily practice, but hadn't begun the reading. She continued telling me about this. All of a sudden, I felt hands underneath my arms, picking me up, but I was watching what was happening, and I was being pulled out of this pond. And there was in the middle of the pond, like an ice island, and I was being pulled out of that water, and I was just placed on this ice island, or whatever it was, in the middle of the water. And then it was over, and I thought, wow, because I really saw it, like I was right there watching it, and I definitely felt, she said, the hands under my arms, and being pulled out of there. And then I started reading the ODAT, One Day at a Time, and in it there's always a Bible reading, and it was about something like, and you shall be pulled out of the depths, the dark depths, and placed upon a rock. And I said, whoa, that's exactly what just happened. Is there anything in your experience that lifted you in some way but felt slightly outside the range of normal, hard to explain rationally, and so you've not shared it? A second brief story she related was about her feeling visited by the spirit of her late husband, Tony, when she went out to water the gardens one day, and noticed a large and beautiful moth alongside the door. It didn't move, and she inquired and realized it was a Luna moth, also known as the American moon moth. Large, beautiful lime green in color, much like the green in many of her paintings, with long trailing tails. They are nocturnal, rarely seen during the day, and the adults live only to reproduce for about a week. That's the next slide, Jordan, number 5 of the moth. As she read, across many cultures, the Luna moth is seen as a symbol of transformation and new life. But we also took a break, Jan and I, from exploring the ultimate meaning of past experiences to create new ones, to enjoy a run to the local and very colorful dump, and to share plates of mussels and a drink on the Damariscotta River, soaking up what it meant to have evolved as persons and as friends for over 73 years. And that's the next slide, Jordan. From violins to mussels. Credo stories continued to come my way, both listening to them and experiencing them myself through the rest of this vacation. There was for example, a 3-hour lunch over crab roll at the South China, Maine, seafood shack with another family member, in conversation what it means for her that her partner finds his spiritual practice in nature but doesn't talk much. And so what does it mean, she asked, not to share such things with one's partner? If you live in a partnership or with other family, do you feel free to share stories, your credo stories, your spiritual experiences with each other? And if not, why not? UUMH is a place where we gather in friendship, as we sang in the opening hymn. And let's remember that in its ancient roots, the word friend comes from the verb to free. A friend is someone who frees you. Perhaps in sharing our credo stories with each other over time, we are doing nothing less than creating wisdom of the heart that arises to show us how things are and which things matter, even before we might understand exactly why. A story is like water that you heat for your bath. It takes messages between the fire and your skin. It lets them meet and it cleans you. Study them and enjoy this being washed with a secret we sometimes know and then not. Now, if you will give me a minute to get to the piano for our closing song, the choir will come forward. They will sing through the song once, and then I invite you to sing through it twice. But I ask you to sing your hearts out like there's no tomorrow, so that no one will hear what likely will be my history of messing up repeating itself. Please rise in body or spirit. Let's join together for our benediction. May faith in the Spirit of life, hope for the community of earth, and love of the sacred in one another be ours now and in all the days to come. And words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.